Today we're looking at the Atramentis Pigeon Blue. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, the Atramentis Pigeon Blue is a blue ink. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a Fountain Pen Revolutions Himalaya with their flex nib to take my notes for this video. Now, before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. Again, immediately put it into water, because look at that line across the bottom. That gray that's there across is really getting into this filter paper very quickly. Now, it does push quite heavily up, and there's a lot of blue at the top, but look at how that gray is really fighting being moved. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And that line across the bottom is very dark, very there. Not a lot of this gray is really pushing up. Now, that blue is completely going away. There's no permanence to the blue part. The gray part, on the other hand, is absolutely not moving. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it's the blue aspect of the ink that really started to bloom out from the lowercase h. It's the blue aspect of this ink that would make me then not want to use it in a note-taking situation. I'm just so risk-averse to the things I write. Looking at the water, you see that water, with only 30 seconds on the page, completely removed the blue off, but left the gray, very dark, very there, not budging. Pen flush, same story. It completely removed the blue, not the gray. The gray is not budging off this paper. It does take using 1/3 bleach solution on an inexpensive converter. And I have to say that because I didn't have a problem with it in a Diplomat converter, where pen flush got it out of a Diplomat converter, but in my Pierre Cardin in a cheaper converter, it took the 1/3 bleach solution to get it out. So a pen by pen case here, but the 1/3 bleach solution completely removed it. That's only 30 seconds on the page. Now, where the center of that dot is, you see a lot of white of the paper, and that's not really discoloring. It's only discolored around the outside, where the paper towel was placed down and smushed it out with only a few seconds. The 1/3 bleach solution, after you use it, immediately flush your pen to get that bleach out of there so you don't rust your metal parts. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. The Atramentis Pigeon Blue has a viscosity of 2.16, making it normal. Just normal. Made it in there. Good job. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. The Atramentis Pigeon Blue has an average dry time of 17 seconds, making it not just normal, but average. Now, let's look at the writing samples. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairefontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and it does offer some very nice shading throughout here. Like we see it in the P and the G. Now the E is much darker than the O in Pigeon. It's very nice shading that we're getting with this. Zoom in just a little bit perhaps for us. See if it'll help. Very nice shading we're getting with the 1.1. The extra fine is its base tone is a little bit lighter. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen, but it has beautiful shading. If we look at the, starts light, gets dark, gets to a midtone. Quick starts really light and works its way darker, very dark at the K. Fox starts nice and light and gets dark. Over starts really light and works its way to very dark. Very nice shading. 12 seconds to dry. Now medium gives us the same tones with no feather, spread, halo sheen, and the shading is again beautiful. Looking at quick, it starts with a nice mid-tone. It's got a couple dark spots in it, and it works its way darker to very dark at the K. Fox starts nice and light and gets very dark at the X. Over starts nice and light and gets very dark at the E. The is a very dark word. Lazy goes from dark down to lighter. Very nice stuff. 18 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby of the extra fine and the medium show plenty of color variation. And that's what we got in the writing sample. Plenty of color variation. And the smear test, you could probably recover this if you smeared while you were writing. Tomoe River. We have no bleeding. We have plenty of ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, or shade. I don't like how this color looks with the cream background. It has affected it in a bad way to me. Just looking at it, the color is just enough different that it just doesn't look as nice with the cream as it does with a white background. The extra fine, certainly a much lighter tone than we saw with the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and no shading. 16 seconds to dry. The medium has the same tone as the extra fine. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen, or shade. It took 22 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both showed us no color variation. We didn't get any. And the smear test, you couldn't recover this. Rhodia. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather, spread, halo sheen. It does have very nice shading. Like when the T cross on Atramentis, at the cross it gets very dark in that spot. The E is very dark. The IS is very dark. Pigeon is much darker than the Atramentis. Blue is much darker than the Atramentis. It's nice shading on this writing, or on this paper. The extra fine is a much lighter tone. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and it does offer some shading. Not tons like we saw with the Clairefontaine, but still some very nice shading. Like the H in the is darker. The bottom part of the Q is much darker. The K is much darker. The B is much darker. The X is much darker. So we get some very nice shading throughout the writing to where we get that transitioning color. Okay? 13 seconds to dry. The medium is just a shade darker than the extra fine. The medium has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and it does offer some very nice shading or very nice shading. The left side of the Q is very dark, but the right side is much lighter. And then it stays light, and it gets darker at the I, lighter at the C, and very dark at the K. Very nice shading that's happening there. The brown starts very dark and works its way light. Fox starts light and works dark. It is beautiful. And 19 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both show us plenty of color variation, and we saw plenty of color variation. We have to look far left to far right on the medium to see it. It's not showing nearly as well on camera. Neither is the extra fine, but there's much more there than what we're seeing on camera. If we can, maybe, all right. The smear test, you would be able to recover it. You'd be able to recover if you smeared while you were writing. It's just such a great color. What happens if we give it a yellow tone background, like the yellow Rhodia? No bleeding, no ghosting, which is what was expected. But what happens to the tones? It actually brings out a little bit more of that green, which is almost what you expect. The yellow and blue makes green. So the 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, or shade. We lost the shading with the 1.1 on yellow paper. The extra fine is a noticeably lighter tone with no feather, spread, halo sheen, or shade. We lost the shading here. 13 seconds to dry. The medium is the same tone as the extra fine, so the tone change here isn't like we had with white paper. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and no shading in the medium on yellow paper with 19 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both actually show more color variation than the white paper, but we saw none in the writing itself. And just like before, we could still recover the smear if you smeared while you were writing. So Life paper, one of my favorite papers, very nice. No feathering, no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1, again, I don't care for this tone of how the ink looks on this tone of paper. It just doesn't look as good here. I like how this ink looks on a white paper. So that's why you do want to try stuff with some different papers. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade. We don't really get to see the shading. I think the tone of the paper is eating it up. The extra fine is a noticeably lighter tone, quite a bit lighter. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It does offer spots of shading, like the K is much darker, the B is much darker, the X is much darker, this H in the middle is much darker, lazy is much darker than the word dog. So we do get some shading throughout this writing, and it only took 10 seconds to dry. Now the medium is a darker tone than the extra fine, but not as dark as the 1.1. The medium has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and it does offer some very nice shading throughout here. The HE is much darker than the T. The CK is much darker than the rest of Quick. BR is much darker than the rest of Brown. Fox works from light to dark. Very nice shading throughout all of this writing. 14 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both show us some color variation. The medium doesn't show nearly as much just for it being darker as the extra fine does, but we did see plenty of color variation up in the writing sample. And the smear test, you could easily recover this if you smeared while you were writing. Apica paper. The 1.1, or sorry, right over here, I've got a couple spots that it's bled in kind of deep, but is not bled through. It wouldn't stop me from using the back of the page, but it is something to be aware of. There's some bleed spots here in the scrubby, but I'm putting it on stupid thick, and I'm scratching into the page. No ghosting. This wouldn't stop me from using the back of the page if I was a back of the page person. Most of the time, I'm not. The 1.1 is no feather, spread, halo sheen. It has spots of shading, fewer spots of shading. Like the G to E is very dark compared to the rest of the writing. The E in blue is very dark compared to the rest of the writing. Same with the E in Atramentis. So when you get them much closer and you get a lot more of the ink down, you do get to see that shading. Now the extra fine is a much, much lighter tone than the 1.1. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It has spots of shading again. Not tons of shading, but spots of shading. Like the bottom loop of the Z is much darker than the rest of the Z. The K is much darker than Quick. The B is much darker than Brown. The X is darker than Fox. The R in over is darker than the rest of the word. We're getting spots where it's darker. Not a whole lot of shade, but what's there is nice. It took 7 seconds to dry. The medium is a darker tone than we got with the extra fine. Not as dark as we see with the 1.1. The medium has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and it has very nice shading throughout. You see that the starts light and gets dark. Quick starts dark, gets light, gets dark again. Brown starts dark, gets light, gets dark again. Fox goes from light to dark. Beautiful stuff. Light to dark on over. Lazy is a very dark word, and then dog is light to dark. Beautiful. 10 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both shows plenty of color variation. The extra fine shows much more than the medium. The extra fine really didn't have color variation, so I don't know where all that came from there. And I don't know where it went here because it was here. So these scrubbies are completely off in their expected results. That's why the number one thing to really use is your writing. Now the smear test, if you smeared while you were writing, you could definitely recover this should you smear. And that is all that I have for the writing sample. Instead of finding inks that look like the Atramentis Pigeon Blue, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. And I was really driven by the amount of gray that was left behind if this got wet. That led me to Atramentis Fog Grey. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Atramentis Pigeon Blue? This is a perfectly named ink, as the blue matches the blue that can show up on pigeons like it was from a photograph. It is very nice. Now I found this ink to be largely well behaved, although it does have an opportunity with some more of your inexpensive converters to stain and need the bleach solution, but I didn't get it with my more expensive converter. So your mileage may vary. I can't say one way or the other on that. This ink shades very nicely throughout, which is also very nice. Thanks for watching.